Hello, everybody. So today I want to review, as we're beginning this course now and heading into really taking off into the course, we're thinking historically from the foundations of race and how that idea of race, which is so prevalent today, right? We see movements, Black Lives Matter, movements for racial justice across the country that just erupted and globally. And so this is a global story. And kind of where we begin with today, we're thinking from what you've read already, Thomas Jefferson on Notes on Virginia. You've watched the video to see his ideas. And why do we begin there historically again? It's to give us a foundation in order to be able to understand today. And that's what we're doing in our social justice studies course, is thinking about not only how, before we get to know how we become active or participate or advocate or analyze contemporary social movements and movements for justice, we have to know how the foundations or the epistemological foundations, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that when we get into Charles Mills. What is epistemology? The study of knowledge, how we know what we know, in essence. Where does knowledge come from? And that's that philosophical field that's known as epistemology. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. So from those foundations, the ideas, the contestations that we see on America's streets today are intimately rooted in ideas of who is superior, right? So the idea of race, when we're looking at the idea of race, we're looking at how it functions politically, meaning how power dynamics play out amongst those identities that we all carry. So for Thomas Jefferson, as we're thinking about these movements, here you have, and this might be familiar, you've watched the documentary Hate documentary, but if you remember this is the University of Virginia. This is the Unite the Right rally, where we know this set the contemporary kind of backlash to certain movements on the streets of America for racial justice and other forms of social justice. And this is a statue where these white nationalists marched to. This is Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was the founder of the University of Virginia, the first public institution of higher learning in the country. And he's also, as we know, we penned one of the authors along Roger Sherman, Ben Franklin, and two others who codified the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. But then what we read was to complicate our view of Thomas Jefferson, to give us a bigger, fuller understanding, was his ideas on race and Notes on Virginia. So how do we reconcile, again, those contradictions? That's what we're taking about. So while one may interpret Thomas Jefferson as being a great purveyor of human rights and liberties, we also know he was a slave owner, and he articulated that blacks are an inferior race, and therefore they justified the position to simply slave labor. And here you have these white nationalists who marched to him to pay homage. So for Charles Mills, the racial contract. Charles Mills is a contemporary philosopher. He is Jamaican, a male of color in as you read, a field of that is dominated by white men. So certain forms of knowing enter that realm, and that those ideas are centered. They emanate from Europe, right? So Charles Mills tells us in the very first sentence of the book, what white supremacy is. And simply put, it is the unnamed political system that has made the modern world system what it is today. So I want to emphasize that white supremacy is not about people, right? This is not about people. This is systems. This is institutions. This is law. This is the social, political, and economic structure, not only in the United States, but the world over. So when we're talking about a white supremacist capitalist system, that is it. That is the economic base that informs everything else, right? What the anthropologist Nicholas de Genova tells us, it is a social and political order of domination and subordination that systematically generates and upholds inequalities of wealth, power, and prestige by privileging racialized whiteness over and above all other categories of racial identity. Right? So when we're talking about white supremacy, it's misused in the media, it's misunderstood in common parlance when we're having conversations, because we tend to think of white supremacy as white supremacist individuals who wear hoods, or these individuals who march with tiki torches, or individuals who are in the White House spewing this type of rhetoric, racial animosity. Those are part of it, right? All those individuals from the White House to these individuals here at the Jefferson Monument to the person wearing a hood over their head. But those are people, those are the individuals. What we're focusing on is a framework in order to understand the structures of society, and that's what we refer to as white supremacy. Right? So there's a history of race. I just wanted to show you this book because it's pretty influential in getting into the ideas beyond also Thomas Jefferson, but other folks as Cotton Mather. So racial thinking and those ideas, the way they were entrenched in early pre-colonial America and into the present, how we follow that trajectory. This is a book by Ibram X. Kendi, Stand for the Beginning, very, very informative text. So what is race? We need to get the foundation before we move forward. It's not biological. The ideas that what Thomas Jefferson that you read when he was thinking about race, he was thinking of it kind of in biological terms, right? And he was torn thinking about it. Something makes them different. Right? But now, post-World War II, and a sociologist would mention, it is a social construction. It is how we give meaning to the way people are perceived in the world. But not a meaning to say just that we're all different. It is a meaning, attributing differential meanings to different particular groups in order to maintain a racial hierarchy, right? And in the service of class domination. So we'll be expanding on that a little bit when we get to Evan Nakano Glenn's work, and as we move through in order to understand our society. So when we're thinking about race, I'm thinking about terms of power. So race, for me, is a social political technology that is deployed. We see it right now in this political moment, and in the past, and it'll probably be for the foreseeable future, where the idea of race, the ideas that are attributed to particular groups in order to tap into certain pre-existing sentiments that people hold in order to maintain systems of this hierarchy of power. So you've already watched the Thomas Jefferson video on that clip from A Power of Race, the Power of an Illusion. So race, for our understanding, is about power. It is not just about celebrating or seeing difference. It is about who has power over others. And this is the way we see it, right? So it's a social construction, the meanings we give to it. And then that informs the epistemology of racial societies. Remember, epistemology is that term, that philosophical field. For us, it's that field of the study of knowledge, the production of knowledge. So it's the knowledge of racial societies that are used to construct and order hierarchy. And that informs how laws are made. This is how white supremacy is produced, right? Or what folks today may call systemic racism, structural racism. We refer to it as the framework of white supremacy, right? But if that helps us think about what I mean by what Charles Mills means of white supremacy, that is it. And it is entrenched through the institution of law. Whether we're looking at Jim Crow, whether we're looking at chattel slavery, whether we're looking at housing discrimination, redlining, these were all laws, anti-miscegenation laws. These are all laws that were informed by race, written into law, legislated, and signed into law. Right? So for the 20th century social theorist Walter Benjamin, quote, lawmaking is power making. And one such law that was fundamentally racialized was the first citizenship law of the United States, that is the 1790 Naturalization Act, what we're contending with right now in our moment is a struggle over who is to be a full citizen, right? When Congress ratified our initial Constitution in 1789 and the subsequent Bill of Rights in 1790, they also laid down the first citizenship law, of the first acts of the first Congress here. And Congress legislated who could be a citizen. And I highlighted here, free white person, right? So when we're talking about, and this is the irony, when they say, well, it's not about race, and it's not only about race, we're going to be talking about this some more. This is about class, this is about gender, this is about domination on multiple levels, intersectional processes that subjugated certain populations. It is not all, but race runs through every single category. And no more important than the first act of Congress on citizenship, which made it very explicit that only free whites, landowning, male, could be citizens. And so we'll be expanding on that as we move through. And here's an image of myself along with Charles Mills at when he gave a lecture here in San Francisco. As I mentioned, he's a contemporary thinker. Page 1, just making it clear as we move through. So what we've read through, and chapter 1, all we read was the first 19 pages. In my other course in political theory, if you're interested in reading some more, we read the entire text because it's really, really foundational and really interrupted the epistemology of Europe as this linear process to constructing who is to achieve universal rights or who can be able to produce. Mills enters to show how injustice is produced. So that, again, just linking to our present moment, the competition on our city's streets across America is to be included, to be part of, to disrupt, or even to create something new in the movements for social justice, but justice as universally defined and not defined by the dictates of a white supremacist form of knowing or epistemology, but it's rooted in the epistemology, say, of Africa, from Asia, from Latin America. And that's where we're thinking from, right? This is very essential into thinking about how we know what we know. And as students in a society, most of us are given what we know. This is why we began thinking through Paulo Freire on pedagogy of the oppressed. A way of education is not really to enlighten us to the injustices of the moment or our history. The traditional form of education it is produced in order to construct obedient citizen subjects, patriots of the nation state, wherever it may be. That is the role or the institution of education. So the institution of education itself is a white supremacist institution, taking the language, the framework that we're building from here, right? So think prior to 1954, who could enter the schools? Integration in schools was illegal. Jim Crow laws. That was solidified, made possible through legislation and upheld through the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, in 1896 with the infamous Plessy v. Ferguson case that gave us that separate but equal clause. From 1896 to 1954, by law, we had a racial apartheid system in the United States with hundreds and hundreds of laws informed by race across the country from the local, state, and federal levels. Right? And we still have that legacy that we are struggling with now. The institution of policing. Yes, that is something that is present. Yes, you have black cops, you have brown cops, you have Asian cops that are part of a white supremacist institution. Why do we call it that? Because that is how we name those institutions that were born from the ground of the epistemological forms of knowing in relation to preserving power for one particular group. So if we go back to the 1600, prior to Bacon's Rebellion, And we see